Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a game from the 1950 USSR Championship, a semifinal round game between Efim and Josif Vatnikov. In this game, see how ignoring control over that e5 square can easily translate into a very quick loss in the Sicilian defense. So Geller on the white end playing e4, open Sicilian, and after d6, bishop to c4. So what we now know today as the Fischer Sozin variation of the Sicilian. This bishop very aggressively plays, soon to be opposite that black king once that king is castled. And with both this knight and bishop focusing on e6, certainly this is going to be something black is going to have to keep a watchful eye on, that e6 square. There will often be sacrifices made on that point. So more development. Castle, bishop e7, bishop e3, just 8 moves in. A lot of development has been made at this point, and in such a dynamic opening as a Sicilian, a great weight is best placed on time and getting your pieces out because of the great possibilities which present themselves in such positions. So you really just want to get your pieces activated and more development. Black castles, bishop b3. The bishop voluntarily goes back to b3. Why do we have that going on? Well, here are a couple things to take note of. From c4, it's going to be a lot more accessible to the black pieces. Moves like knight to a5 or knight to e5. Also, more long-term, the rook eventually being placed to this half-open file, or even queen c7 moves. Sacrifices on e4 followed by the advancement on d5 with the minor piece fork, or even a6, b5, all of which target that bishop for as long as it's on that c4 square. So it's definitely sensible to be placing it on b3 at that point. And black is just off to go after it. Knight a5, looking to take that bishop out. Unfortunately, black delays that capture for quite some time. And when the capture does occur, it's just too late. And so throughout this brief game, I'll just be showing the different possibilities that black does have for taking the bishop and how white can be reacting. So what we have now, f4, and this is going to work well with this bishop on this diagonal. f4 is doing a couple things. One, supporting e5, and two, supporting an f5 advance. Now, if the f5 advance is the one that gets in, you'll note that the bishop and pawn are converging really well on that e6 square, or that e6 pawn. And if that pawn needs to do something, if it has to move or capture, you'll note the knight on c3 is going to be pretty happy about having access to that d5 square. So this pawn and this bishop on b3 can indirectly be influencing this c3 knight. So at this point we have b6, so clearly white is, with this f4 move, they're getting ready to play e5 maybe, and black is just ignoring it, allowing white to move forward with it, and instead opting to play b6 and get that bishop on the main diagonal. And from here we kind of just start to see black getting kicked around quite a bit, so I think it's important to take pause and see just a couple variations at least that black could have been going forward with, and here's one of them. Just to take out that bishop, and after the recapture, I am capturing in this way because the knight is, it wants to stay on that central post, and this is not a liability. This is a half-open file, and that's going to be a good thing. So if this does happen, just recapture like that, and now here's what black can be playing, e5. And, white is not going to be playing e5 themselves, and so this is just another variation to be going with. By having a black pawn right here, by having that pawn maintained on that e5 square, that means that this knight is not going to be kicked away, and will be able to remain as an excellent defender of the kingside position. So that's one variation. Another quick one to point out is just queen c7, indirectly controlling e5. She is accessible to knight moves to that b5 square, but after just queen to b8, still keeping a close eye on that e5 square, we'll eventually have a6 kicking that knight back, and then the queen could get back to that c7 square, or even make moves like b5. So anyhow, those were a couple alternatives. Take the bishop or play queen to c7, but the e5 square, it's ignored. b6 was played instead, allowing for e5, and after the knight goes back, well, why did the knight go back eventually it's going to have to move at some point. So taking first would allow both bishop and rook more possibilities. The bishop has those 2 squares available and now these 3 squares, whereas in this position, after just going here right away, clearly this rook does not have access to those 3 squares along the f-file, nor does the bishop have access to g5 or h6. So this pawn is essentially interfering with both bishop and rook for as long as it remains on the board. So that may be a reason for the knight going back to e8 right away. Now, one other thing to note is that playing to d7, what's the problem with that? Well, the bishop doesn't have direct view of this e6 pawn, and so there we go. The tactic that I was referring to earlier, that e6 square crashing through, you could take this rook or maybe even take this one. Knight could pivot on c7 and get the queen rook. So that's why we're not having knight to d7 at this point, but instead knight to e8. And now white just pressing forward yet again, really crashing through on that e6 square. And black plays d takes f. Now here are a couple interesting lines right here. One is, if knight takes bishop, what should white do here? Well, here's something that white could be doing. They could play the in-between move, knight c6. This is a weakened square. Since b6 was played, c6 is forever a hole. The queen is hit, and after the queen moves, you take on this square and follow up, still ignoring this knight's capture, playing f6 instead, and this black king side is really messed up very badly. We could even see after, let's say, the queen moves at this point, pawn takes, you could even see this queen rook making quick use of that a4 square and swinging over to be a very aggressive piece. In fact, I could really see all of these pieces acting as attackers against this black king, which is really in a tough spot. In fact, you might as well chalk up that f6 pawn as being an excellent attacker as well. So we have essentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 attackers versus that king, which has very little defense. So that's just one quick variation at this point right here. After white has played f5, if knight takes bishop, we could have knight c6, takes, f6, etc. But we don't have that. Instead, d takes, followed by f takes e6, so ignoring the pressure on this knight. Now this right here is another opportunity for black to maybe take this bishop. After pawn takes on e6, black has another opportunity to take on b3, at which point now we could have knight to c6 yet again, hitting this queen and bishop. So there's no time for queen takes queen because of the in-between move, capturing the bishop with check and then recapturing the queen. Also, queen c7 would run into the deadly knight d5 right here, and there'd be a killer fork on that e7 square. The bishop would actually turn out to just be lost if queen c7 was played. And so queen d6, this is maybe the best that black could really be doing at this point. If queen to d6 is played, exchange queens, capture the knight finally, and after bishop takes pawn, the material here is balanced, but this pawn right here is going to be a big target, and black has this knight on that back rank essentially not fully developed at this point. Even though they do have the bishop pair, white is going to be better in this position. This pawn is soon to fall, and white is going to be better from this position. Certainly better than how it turned out in the game, but just a couple quick variations to be taking note of. The what ifs. What if the knight takes the bishop? Well, knight c6, etc., making use of that c6 square before taking on b3. But in this game, we don't have that. We have f6. The other variation would actually result in the loss of a pawn. If this knight is captured, we just take on this square. The king goes here. Take, and after the smoke is cleared, white is just up a pawn. And so maybe that was going to be the best variation, but the game really went downhill very quickly at this point. After f6, a very scary move to make right here. The pawn really just getting ready to move and land a discovered check. If this bishop ever gets the bright idea to move, or not, wouldn't be a bright idea, it would be a terrible idea, but subjecting their king to definitely discovered attacks as soon as this f6 move is made. So we have knight to f5, looking to play queen takes queen, and then follow up with e6, or excuse me, e7, forking the bishop and rook. And so now we have knight takes bishop, and at this point it's just way too late. There's no need to take that knight. There's more forceful moves in the position, namely knight d5, looking to just make this bishop move in some way so that this pawn could get to that e7 square. And when it is played to that square, it comes with great effect. And at this point, there's really nothing that can be done. Knight takes rook. Well, actually, the queen's going to turn out to be lost here. There's nothing to do. If the king moves, the queen is lost. And if the queen takes knight, well, we got it backed up there with that f5 knight. So this is the main threat right here. Knight takes bishop. So black tries to interfere with this idea and play knight to d4, and the game finishes up very nicely at this point. We have a nice sequence of moves, starting first with knight on d, takes that bishop, king goes to the corner, and then knight to g6, just clearing the way with check so that this pawn can now advance to e7, and it certainly comes with great effect, so much so that at this point black ends up resigning. This is a very deadly fork, and the queen is going to be lost. She can't do anything. She can't even play here to try and recapture after pawn takes rook because the knight is watching over this square. So as it was in this game, after just this small combination right here, but very strong combination, knight g6, pawn takes, and e7, black ends up resigning. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.